We called them walking trees, despite the fact that they weren't actually trees. They weren't even plants, and their ambulation was scarcely what fit the definition of walking. Yet, that's the nature of our language. We apply existing concepts to new discoveries or new concepts in order that we can use the analog to conceptualize them. Our species had done exactly that 1,000 years earlier in the computer age, when we used words like page and file and folder to describe the compartmentalization of digital information. Now here we were a millennium later, visiting foreign worlds thanks to technologies our 21st century ancestors could never have imagined, and we were employing a nomenclature for entirely foreign life forms that were neither plant nor animal, according to comfortable and familiar Earth-based plant and animal concepts. Actually, all of the terms our biology team used to describe the specifically evolved traits of walking trees relied on known Earth flora. Budding, branches, rooting, and shedding were words that we could relate to, but which didn't adequately describe this unique creature's organic means. It was one of those words, one of those emotionally loaded words, which was the cause of our schism at present. Resembling a fallen branch balanced upside down on its sundry twigs, walking trees had developed a reproductive method entirely unique in the universe so far as we had yet discovered. The walking tree spent its entire long life anchored to one spot, and was content to remain fixed in place, drawing nourishment from the ground and the air and the star which served as a planet's sun, without ever worrying about repopulating, so long as the nourishment was satisfying and the conditions were safe. However, when conditions changed, when the creature became aware of a risk to its survival, a dried-up water source, contamination from another creature's waste, erosion, or a blockage of the sun's light, for example, the walking tree would activate two unique methods of reproduction, one sexual of sorts, and the other a kind of cloning. The breeding walking tree would bud with two entirely different kinds of bud. One was what our biologists called male and the other female, but as with all of the earthly terms we imposed on this not a plant, not an animal, the terms were not exactly accurate. The female bud, or the flower as our linguists dubbed it, would open like an orchid with stamen, and the male bud would extend from an entirely different branch of the creature. The male bud, or penis as our linguists, oblivious to their own inconsistencies, named it, would emit a pheromone that had no discernible scent, but which would chemically inspire an unthreatened walking tree to extend its own male bud, which would emit not pheromone, but genetic-laden spores, which would blow through the air until they eventually fertilized the female flowers of the at-risk walking tree. Once the male bud had served its seductive function on the at-risk walking tree, it would undergo metamorphosis, as would the female bud once fertilized. Both would extend and branch out, fractals twigging and stemming in all directions. In short order, the walking tree would genuinely resemble its earthly, arboreal namesake, a trunk with two main boughs, branching out in divergent directions. One branch would be a genetic cross between the mother and the father hosts, the other a genetic clone of the parent it was stemming outward from. Once mature, the new walking trees would await a storm or windy day, and then would break off from the parent, abandoning it to its fate and tumbling away to anchor their twigs in a hopefully safer location, where they would begin the cycle anew. Yet it was the donor walking tree's male bud which was the cause of our schism. It had come to represent a moral dilemma for the philosophers on our team. Once started, the male bud would be a part of the walking tree. However, the donor no longer had use for it. It wouldn't want to allow the offspring to develop, as it would then have to dedicate resources to its development. Not to mention that once detached, it would be in competition with the parent for resources. However, in its present state, the parent couldn't detach it. They had no hands and no teeth. It had to wait for the offspring to begin to develop, and then close off the nourishment stream, causing the offspring, or baby as some of our team unofficially insisted on calling it, to starve and die. Eventually, it would wither and break off, leaving the parent to continue unaffected. And this was the source of our conflict. Roughly half of the team wanted to call this activity a miscarriage. The other half wanted to call it an abortion. Some of those who wanted to call it an abortion had no moral qualms with the idea of actual abortion, but others did, and there was infighting in this camp due to that disagreement. But they weren't alone in their discord. Some of those who wanted to call it a miscarriage wanted that terminology because they had moral issues with abortion, and they didn't want to confront the philosophical disconnect that calling something which they saw as natural and necessary an abortion carried. Others who preferred the term miscarriage had no issue with the morality of abortion, but simply felt that this was a natural function and not a choice made by the walking tree, so it should not be called an abortion, which to them suggested agency. Ultimately, it would be up to our captain to determine what to call this phenomenon. What we as a team called the phenomenon in our official transcript would be the official term given to the activity. We had to send our findings home in the brief communications window we had been allotted, and that window was fast approaching. 2 terms, 4 camps of thought over what and why to name it. I didn't envy the captain. He would not only have to alienate half of his team by choosing what for them amounted to the wrong term, he'd also have to explain his reasoning to them, potentially alienating half of those who agree with his choice, but not with his reasons. I was the only member of the team who had no preference, and this became common knowledge as the others fiercely debated and defended their positions. Finally, the deadline for his decision approaching, the captain called me into his quarters. "The others tell me you have no pony in this race," the captain said, employing another of the dated cliches that had caused this tempest in a teapot to begin with. "No, sir," I said. "I don't." "Why is that?" he asked. "Words are loaded and carry baggage," I explained. "I understand that we rely on that baggage to make ourselves understood. In fact, I just did it when I used the term baggage. However, beneath the text is the subtext. What we mean may not be what we say, and tempers should be meted to allow for that reality." "Meted?" the captain said. "Parsed. Bestowed. Allotted," I explained. "Are you a linguist or a philosopher?" the captain demanded. "No, sir," I said. "I'm a biologist." "We carry linguists and philosophers on these teams, specialists to hash out these issues," the captain said. "The biologists normally just go along with the determinations of those experts." "Yes, sir," I said. "That's what I intend to do. It's why I don't have a pony in this race, as you say." "So what do you think we should call this phenomenon?" the captain asked point blank. "I'll gladly go along with whatever decision you make, sir." He shook his head. "But surely you have a preference," he said. "I see all sides of the issue," I said. "Nobody seems right or wrong to me." "If it was up to you, what would you call it?" the captain asked. "Fortunately, it's not up to me," I said. "What if it was?" "It's not," I said. "It is now," the captain declared. The description of walking trees had been almost entirely composed by our writing team, and the time to send the description homeward was minutes away. Finally, the captain and I emerged from our seclusion, and he sat at the console to enter the term he had compelled me to select. The donor walking tree's potential offspring is then choked off from nutrients until it withers and is sloughed from the trunk of the parent. We call this phenomenon. The cursor blinked in place, waiting for the captain to enter my decision. The captain took his seat and waited for the last possible minute before typing. The words, "we call this phenomenon," sat next to the blinking cursor. Representatives of all 4 camps of thought about what words should come next stood breathing down the captain's neck, waiting for him to type. Finally, he began to strike the keys, and he filled in the blank with the term I had just moments before told him to type, after exacting from him a promise to type my decision, whatever he personally felt about it. "We call this phenomenon none of our business." Send.